Hello and welcome back, and that's right, we want to continue talking about TerraMaster NAS and helping you set up your TerraMaster NAS right the very first time. And today we're going to talk about our old friend security. That is right, you're setting this device up to be on for days, weeks, months or years at a time. You can't always be sitting there staring at it. Right now that system could be in your home running the whole time, and you need to know, is it as secure as possible? Now, this is an enormous subject for the reasons that we're going to discuss in just a moment. But to make it easier, more curable, and also to help users that have got slightly different user case scenarios, we've actually broken this into two parts. This is part 6, where we're going to be talking about setting up devices, integrity and robust secure connection from local client devices, and those who you already trust but need to make sure that it's secure from network, but also those connected devices and their own client OSs. In part 7, we're going to be sorting out remote access. We'll be looking into DDNS, applying encrypted certificates, firewalls, DOS attacks, and VPN allocation and firewalls. So if you come to this video for ensuring secure remote access, I still advise you watch this video, but look out for chapter 7, which should be coming out in the next couple of weeks there. Again, we've been working on this series for a while. There's now around 10 parts. I've edited the first 5 for every single brand. So right now we're working our way through these. I'm recording this, so hopefully it should be live and with you for this TerraMaster series in the next week or so. But for now, let's crack straight on. Now, you may be already aware TerraMaster was one of the brands a couple of years ago now that were impacted by the Deadbolt ransomware attack. It was them. They were also was Acerstore and QNAP. Don't worry. Ultimately, no brand is 100% safe from any kind of... But TerraMaster changed a lot of things about their platform, and one of the reasons we've made this video is simply because of just the sheer number and range of automatic and manual security improvements that have been applied to this system, and I'm going to walk you through them and how to utilize them. But let's start Billy basic. Let's keep it nice and easy. Let's go with the obvious authentication. Going into that and enabling the means to add things like Google Authenticator or other third-party OTP services and binding them, or utilizing TerraMaster's own OTP service on the system, will allow you to ensure that you can have an extra layer of authentication on your TerraMaster. So not only have you got the utilization of the password connected with the username and all the authentication that you've allowed access to have, and we'll talk about that more in a moment, but now you can add that extra step utilizing that TerraMaster app there that you can install on your device, and therefore a code that's being refreshed periodically will allow you to stop unintended use. But that still opens the door, doesn't it, to 30 or 60 seconds of accessing via other accounts. What about that? Well, before we go further, you should make sure you have the Security Advisor running. The Security Advisor can be run a lot of these different measures later on in the video, many of which are now disabled by default, thanks to TerraMaster's tightening a lot of its whole setup there. But the next thing you really need to do is to head into the control panel, scroll down and go to notifications. This is really important, because if something happens with your system, be it a user logging in who shouldn't, a device logging in, or an IP logging in that you don't like, you need to know as quickly as possible. So setting up the notifications will allow you, whether it's the TerraMaster app or utilizing traditional push post notifications here, to know when something's going down on your system. And you can take that one step further by logging into the system's logs and seeing if something is going down that's negative, and that crossed with notifications happening to a particularly negative, and if someone logs into your system with a wrong suspicious, go in to the online users and start disconnecting users if you choose. Next up, we've got to talk about updates, because updates more often than not genuinely are the cause for some of the worst executed ransomwares, malware, and viruses. Now, just before I show you, and again, it's the difference between viruses, malware, and ransomware. Now, viruses and malware are still a concern when it comes to network attached storage devices like the TerraMaster. These are typically designed to either one, weaken or soften a system in order for it to be exploited or data taken away, or to render the machine completely inoperable. Malware and viruses tend to do one or the other, but their usage in network attached storage has diminished quite a lot in recent years. The reason being that when it comes to the amount of data being held on these servers, ransomware has now become the big one. Why is that? Well, much in the same way that malware and viruses can weaken a system and allow exploitation of vulnerabilities, ransomware, it's even simpler. All it wants to do is that says, all of that data over there, I want to stick it all in an archive. I want you to turn it into a .zip, a .7z zip, turn it into a .rar, whatever. Basically, encrypt it down, either and wholesale delete the original data or just replace it. Then create a key, delete the key, and leave a .rtf document or Word doc that says, we've encrypted your data. If you want the password, send some money to this BitLocker, this Bit wallet. I think that's happening is just to open up the tiniest hole and the right credentials to inject that. Important, not just on TerraMaster, but generally. You can see down here, I've got an update here on the bottom right of my screen. Hopefully you can see it. And that is a Windows 11 update. I'm running Windows 10 and it's urging me to go for 11. I'm not going to do it. But I know deep down, when I'm using my system, if I've got updates for Windows 10 and it's telling me you need these for your security, or maybe Chrome to have updates, so I get it. Sometimes it's just inconvenient. But a 24/7 NAS system, other than if you have constant surveillance or VMs and you can't afford to lose a second of downtime outside of pre-selected hours, there is no other real excuse to not action updates. Now, important updates on the TerraMaster platform. System updates are the bigger. They're basically updating your operating system. These require a system restart, but they are also generally the most important updates, because the vulnerabilities, when they are found, will all too often be utilized in multiple ends within the NAS that use the same routines. When it comes to installing those updates, make sure updates are automatically searched for and installed automatically. Unfortunately, when it comes to updates on the TerraMaster system, as you can see, automatically check for updates and download update every 24 hours is not the same as installing it automatically. So that's another reason why you want those automated updates. You want the system to let you know an update has come in so you can action it as soon as possible or convenient to you, probably the first one. But when it comes to apps that you install, bear in mind that much like an app like Skype or something that you put on Windows, they too can have their own vulnerable updates periodically, but again, you still have to manually action them. And before we go further, I think it's important to note that we're not ragging on TerraMaster here in the same way we're not ragging on QNAP, Synology or Asus or TrueNAS, Unraid, any of them. A lot of these platforms, they didn't develop the sandbox building blocks that they are built on. The majority, and not all, but the majority of NAS software that we use is built on Linux. Linux is in everything. So many apps and services you use every day are built on Linux. Linux has been around for donkey's years. It has constant updates, and as soon as an update comes out, black hat hackers are constantly trying to break it and find vulnerabilities. They do this for multiple reasons. Number one, if a vulnerability is found in a Linux kernel, there's every possibility that vulnerability goes back to all the older versions of Linux, which means a whole long-term vulnerability is found, a day zero vulnerability. However, what's worse is as soon as they found a vulnerability, they know that there is probably third-party software like TOS, like any of the other NAS software, that has been built on that vulnerability. And when an update for Linux arrives for that particular Linux kernel, it is not automatic longer for NAS brands that have now got to change their entire configurating platform on that Linux kernel. They can't just push update the way we do. So there is a time factor for a hacker to take advantage and capitalize on that vulnerability there. And again, particularly with Deadbolt, have a system that's been on for days, weeks, months, or years in some cases, as was the case with TerraMaster, Asustor, and QNAP NASes that were affected because people set them up. They just weren't until 2024. Go ahead with that level of naivety with a system connected to the internet. You just simply can't. Now, reconfiguring other elements of the system, and particularly its defaults, are things that either TerraMaster have addressed in recent updates to TOS, but also generally are at your disposal. So, for example, in the control panel, I would definitely recommend looking into the file service tab and ensuring that all of the unused file services are disabled. So, for example, if you're doing a NAS to NAS backup over the network, you might be using rsync or RTRR, real-time remote replication. In that kind of backup to this system, do not have it enabled. And unless you are utilizing specific Apple services that require AFP, I recommend you disable them. The same goes with any other service that may be enabled. Disable them all. And to TerraMaster's credit, by default, generally only SMB is enabled. I believe AFP may be enabled as well. I don't remember enabling that. Now, SMB, you kind of need. Chances are you're going to be using SMB in some shape or form. That's why it is generally left on. But do disable all of those, and that doubles even more so for disabling SSH. Hugely important, and definitely, even on local area network, disable the hell out of that. Because SSH, with the right admin powers afforded to the user, and bear in mind that the admin account is still disabled by default. If an access user has the right security credentials and the right privileges to their account and get access to SSH, there's network identity, and it's worth highlighting. And this is something, unfortunately, is going to be unavoidable in a lot of cases, changing the default ports of the system. I mentioned before that in the next part in this series, we're going to talk about remote access, and we're trying to focus right now on making a robust local system here. But I will say, that changing the default port is going to be crucial, because by default, and this is again not just TerraMaster, systems roll out with the same ports. The reason being is they develop lots of apps and services that have to communicate semi-autonomously with the NAS, and with that going on, the wrong port can lead to the system not being accessible. So a lot of the time these default ports appear, but it's strongly recommended when you set the device up to change these default ports. The reason being is it means that those default ports that are well publicized online and in setup guides and more, minimizing the attack vector down to 0.000001. Again, you can configure a lot of those options there, and indeed if you're using multiple LAN ports, you can actually bond ports to user access if you need to there. Now, we've talked a lot about isolating this system, isolating a lot of the file services you don't use. We've talked about going into the control panel and changing a lot of the access rights to individual users in part 2 of this series, where we talked through allowing and disallowing access to features, services and storage on the system. But there's actually some rather rudimentary things you can do as well. For example, if you want to even further close the door on people exploiting vulnerabilities, because remember, you can only go so far until a vulnerability is found, then it sounds very caveman. Go into the control panel and nice and simple, select the option for hardware and power, and under power, you can create an automated on-off. For this is, if, for example, you sleep from 10 PM until 6 AM. I don't know your life. Well done, you had a good night's kip. Now, if you sleep for that period of time, yes, you're getting notifications, but what if you sleep through them? What if you're getting DDoS attack? What if you're being brute force hacked? All of those things add up. So if you are concerned about leaving the system unattended outside of access time, you can use this scheduled feature here to enable a power on and a power off at a certain period of time. You could have the system power on at 8 AM and power off at 8 PM. And that means, regardless of attack vectors, regardless of updates and IP protocol and ports, the system's just not accessible for that period of time. And yes, you can manually override by pressing the button, but that is just another rather caveman but very useful way to lower those attack vectors further. And finally, you have got what I would like to consider the security kill switch maneuver. The option that I've not really found in it is going into the control panel and finding isolation mode. Isolation mode is absolutely game changing. Now what this is if you think your system is being utilized remotely, if you have concerns about people accessing it, if you are going on holiday and you want to do it in one click, disable access to the system, if you have any concerns of that nature, and while you are out of office you want to ensure the system is inaccessible until you are ready to you click it, you go to apply, and just like that, now the system is going to sever. You have to put in a power user password. The system will now reboot into an isolation mode. The system cannot be accessed. And that means until you are ready to come back and power up the system and re-enable access, you've now severed access to the system. Now you might be thinking, well, you've just turned it off. No, I haven't. The system, upon reboot, is going to be network accessible. It's going to be accessible by local access users. It will not be accessible by third-party HTTP and PHP script on the system. It won't be accessible via some of those HTTPS encrypted access remotely. It will not matter. Only those local bubble users with their own security credentials will have access pattern there. It's as straightforward as that. But this has been how to set up security on your TerraMaster NAS and get it right the first time. As mentioned in part 7, we will talk more about the remote access stuff and allowing access outside of your TerraMaster in the most secure way possible. But I do recommend following and implementing a number of the changes in today's video. Again, if you need further help, use the free advice section over on NAS Compares or the NAS Builder to know which system is right for you. In the free advice section, we not only have our Discord, but our recommended first and third party community support servers. Services. Alongside that, you've got access to subreddits that we recommend, or you can use our own community forum. If that's not enough, as mentioned, go to the free advice section where if you're okay with support in 3 to 5 next working day support from me or Eddie. And of course, head over to Ko-Fi or Patreon, where not only have we got the membership tiers where you can get regular expedited support services per month, but on top of that, access to this content early, exclusive content, webinars, and more. And finally, if that's not enough and you're still worried about your system, use the consultation services we offer there, where me or Eddie will hop on Zoom and go through your system with you and work out where the vulnerabilities may or may not be. Thank you so much for watching. I hope you